Everybody's so low.
MAGA infighting over Epstein gets more intense this week. We'll talk about how you can take advantage of this to separate your MAGA curious or MAGA adjacent friends from the Republicans in the next election. Friend of the show, James Talarico, has some momentum thanks to a big misstep by CBS. It's a bit of a clinic in political judo, using your opponent's strength against him. We'll examine the prospects for an actual blue Texas. The Republicans took a 2-year break from calling for photo ID requirements, but they've renewed it now. No one else seems to be talking about why the break and why the relapse, but we have a former statewide chief election official joining us. Oh, wait, it's me, and I'm here every week to break it down. Welcome back to the podcast for the 54% of Americans who regularly vote for progress and want to convince their friends and family members to join our majority. This is Majority 54.
Well, his Epstein story is not going away for Trump. He was asked about it on Air Force One. Let's go to that clip.
So Hillary Clinton said in an interview today that she and her husband are getting pulled into the Epstein matter to divert attention from you and that your administration has something to hide. What's your response to that?
I have nothing to hide. I've been exonerated. I have nothing to do with Jeffrey Epstein. They went in hoping that they'd find it and found just the opposite. I've been totally exonerated. In fact, Jeffrey Epstein was fighting that I don't get elected with some author, a sleazebag, by the way. And I've been totally exonerated. No, they're getting pulled in, and that's their problem. I don't know, they're going to have to see what happens. But I watched her in Munich, and she seriously has Trump derangement syndrome.
Do you think that she should publicly testify?
You know, I've been totally exonerated on Epstein. And it's really interesting because they've been pulled in. Think of it. They've been pulled in. Clinton and many other Democrats have been pulled in, yeah.
Ravi, we know that Trump has not actually been exonerated of anything. In fact, every release seems to implicate him more deeply. But I do find it a little bit morosely humorous how often he has to announce himself exonerated of things, because it's always BS, but every time he announces himself exonerated, I think to myself, I don't think I've ever had to announce myself exonerated of anything.
I mean, there are tons of public officials around the world who've already had to resign because of the latest release of Epstein files, just the latest release, right? People like Peter Mendelsohn in the UK, the former prime minister of Norway, I think, was just indicted this week. And in a lot of these cases, you know, people are talking about Starmer, you know, whether he could survive this. In a lot of these cases, what's alleged of a lot of these folks is nowhere even in the proximity of what we know to be true of Trump and his relationship with Epstein. You know, you think about Wasserman in LA, this guy who was an agent. He ran an agency, now is, I think, the chair of the LA Olympic Committee. And from what I understand, he had some kind of romantic relationship with Maxwell before even the first Navarro indictment went down, the sweetheart deal. So I'm curious, or not Navarro, who's the guy who gave him the Acosta?
Acosta,
yeah. A lot of these people are nowhere even in the vicinity of Trump. Now, a lot of them deserve whatever consequences anyway, but Trump has yet survived, I think, what would take down anybody else. But there are signs that his coalition is cracking on this. I could have pulled 50 videos here, but I'm just going to play a couple of them, starting with the podcaster Shaun Ryan.
I've been pretty quiet about Pam Bondi in front of Congress the other day, talking about how the Dow's up to 50,000. Nobody gives a fuck, because what you should be talking about is how you are going to investigate and prosecute any pedophiles that were running around on Epstein Island that you're affiliated with. But we didn't talk about that, did we? Oh, and what's the excuse? What was the excuse? Oh, if we prosecute everybody, the whole system would go down. Well, you know what that sounds like? That sounds like how Trump ran his campaign. Let's drain the swamp. Doesn't that sound a lot like draining the swamp? It actually is drain the swamp served up to you on a fucking silver platter. But you're not going to take it, are you? You're going to protect pedophiles. You're going to protect pedophiles rather than go after them and hope that everybody's happy that the Dow hit 50,000. Are you fucking out of your mind? I guess the whole drain the swamp campaign promise was another fucking bullshit lie, huh? Man, the lies are stacking up fast. I've never seen so many fucking lies appear in, what, a year? It's only been a fucking year. Look at all the fucking lies. You know, I wanted to talk to you about something else, too. Then you got Pam Bondi and what's that other guy's name? Todd Blanche. Yeah, running around giving Ro Khanna and Massey all this shit because they accidentally put two names that are apparently innocent, out that were in the Epstein.
So, we haven't even had, because it happened after our show last week, we haven't even had a chance to talk about the brilliant communication strategy of answering so many questions with the Dow hit 50,000.
Right.
Now, what they're counting on is what has worked for Trump for a really long time, which is people saying, you know what? My life doesn't seem to be disturbed by this information, so I'm not going to defect from Trump, or I'm not going to be bothered by it because it has affected my life. And you can see the parallels to this because we have watched it over the last 30 years in Russia, right? How many people were there at the beginning of Putin's time that were like, look, he's not coming after me. I'm making money. It's the basic authoritarian model. But it was a bit a bridge too far when it came from the attorney general, whose job has nothing to do with the Dow and whose job is simply to be in charge of law enforcement for the country. And I think that's why that became a meme. And additionally, it's the piece that we have talked about the last few weeks, which is a big part of the Trump base, particularly the newly acquired 2024 Trump coalition, is people who understand the world through a prism that says there's a big conspiracy. I'm not a part of the conspiracy. And so it's kept me down in some way or another. And they understand the world that way. And so now for them to be protecting that conspiracy is really damning for them. And Shaun Ryan would go in that category.
Well, and it's fragile because what happens if the Dow isn't up? Never mind. I don't even want to start with the contradictions. When the stock market was booming under Biden, we were told the stock market isn't the economy, and they had a remarkable ability to separate out the issues back then. But again, it's like, a year from now, who's to say what the stock market's going to show? But also, I think like even people who have bought a lot of Trump BS in the past, and I don't know how much of it, I'm not an avid Shaun Ryan follower, so I don't know how much she's bought in the past, but it seems like people who've even bought a lot of past BS, people like Andrew Schultz, seem to be somewhat puzzled by what they're being offered up now. And, I don't know how to categorize Nick Fuentes here, but of all the clips of previous Trump supporters I've seen online, Fuentes is by far the most blistering. And normally I would skip, him in general because of what he stands for. But I do think the cadence of what he's offering is fundamentally different than what I've seen in a lot of corners of MAGA at any point in his presidency. So let's go to this clip.
My message in 26, you could take it or leave it. Don't vote. Don't vote. Do not vote in the midterms. The Republicans have to lose. They have to lose. They have to crash and burn. A cleansing fire is the only thing that will save us. It cannot be fixed. Fuck them. Fuck Trump. Fuck MAGA. Fuck all this stuff. It can't be fixed. If it could have been fixed, it would have been fixed in 2025, but it wasn't. They made every mistake. Liberation Day, disaster. Doge, disaster. Big Beautiful Bill, disaster. Epstein files, disaster. Iran, disaster. The personnel, Mike Waltz, disaster. Ratcliffe, disaster. Rubio, disaster. Pam Bondi, disaster. All self-inflicted.
So you go ahead.
Well, remember the Charlemagne ad, the trans ad? I think we should take this because I think people are going to be all like, well, we shouldn't elevate Nick Fuentes, whatever. Like they weren't saying that about Charlemagne, who was a Kamala supporter from what I understand. It's like, I would target this to the right wing with $1 gazillion.
The clip, he's in the picture, you can see an America First hat. I mean, right. It's pretty well made for that exact purpose. I want to break this down a little bit. There are, in the 2024 election, two primary sort of in the 2024 election, there are two primary verticals in the alternative media space through which the Trump campaign became very powerful. And they are basically cultural figures who were warm to Trump and political figures who had a large political following, right? Cultural figures who became warm to Trump, Schultz, Rogan, we just showed one in Shaun Ryan. These are people who came into alternative media not talking exclusively about politics. Politics is not their origin story in developing a fan base, but they come from a culturally conservative, I would say sort of bro-centric place, and it lent itself quite naturally in that moment of woke language that was turning off a lot of people in that world and a lot of their listeners. It lent itself to a huge opening for Trump. And then there's this other space, which are the Fuenteses, the Shapiros, et cetera, of the world, whose origin is strictly political, and their listeners come to them because they are political hobbyists from the far right. It is one thing to start to lose one of those two tent poles, which started, I'd say, 3 or 4 months ago in earnest. They started to have real concerns coming out of Rogan, and now we've seen it recently of Schultz. Now you're seeing it from Shaun Ryan. That is damaging, but they have proven in 2020 that they can win an election exclusively with the politically centric alternative media crowd, the people who just turn out because they're enthused and they listen to Shapiro and they listen to Fuentes. But now they are starting to see cracks in that side as well. And going into the midterm election, that's really damaging for them and really a huge window of opportunity for the rest of us.
Well, I would say this is going to sound like I'm giving credit to somebody who I think is despicable in Fuentes. So let me stipulate that he's horrible and his views are horrible. But if you are looking at this just strictly from the cleavages within MAGA and where we're going to go from here, he has a more coherent worldview than Ben Shapiro does. So when I listen to the Ben Shapiro clips, the problem with Ben Shapiro is that he has, and again, it's a despicable worldview that Fuentes has, but it's a coherent one. And he is way more bold in the moves that he makes than Shapiro. If you look at Shapiro, he was writing about in 2016 about all the things about Trump that I think he truly believes. And he was blistering. He was persuasive to a conservative audience. And then over time, he made a business decision, as you've pointed out, over the past few years, where he has decided he is going to support Trump. He's going to grow his media company because he knew there wasn't a lane to grow a big media company with the kind of like Bill Kristol type rhetoric, or at least he didn't think. I mean, obviously the guys at the Bulwark have proven him wrong, but he didn't think he could build a big media company that way. And so he's contorted himself into this way where he's going to support JD Vance still. He still supports Trump, yet he calls out anti-Semitism and the bigotry and the this and the that. He spent all this time talking about all the Biden scandals, and he's now got a breadcrumb, a little bit of critiques of Trump and crypto. Like you'll see him go on the right podcast and be like, yeah, that's appalling. But if you were to stack up the amount of hours he spent on what were relatively minor scandals, especially in comparison from Biden compared to what we're seeing now, I mean, you can go on and on and on. No intellectual consistency. Whereas Fuentes, yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, with Fuentes is like he's like what he names all those things from Trump. A lot of things his problem with Trump is that he's not more extreme on some of these issues. Like, and as bad as dangerous as that view is, it certainly seems to me more consistent and sellable to the audiences that he's going towards.
The last point that you made is the most important one, which is this is actually about market share. At the end of the day, they look at this and this is a business. And this is what Schultz and Rogan and Ryan and Shapiro and Fuentes and Carlson all have in common, which is the Trump administration is going to end at some point. And even prior to that, by the very natural political rules of gravity, Trump's popularity and his ability to get attention is going to start to erode and go downhill. And so they have to look beyond that because they need an audience beyond that. So unlike politicians, elected officials in Congress, they have to actually look at what is the long horizon as to how I keep making money, as opposed to what do my voters want right at this very moment. And that's really what is such a huge problem for the Trump administration right now, is because the best way for them to do that is to be in a fight. And right now, the best fight for them to be in is actually with people in the Trump administration, because the fight with the left is tired, and because a lot of their people believe that they've already won that fight.
Yeah, and I think it was Tim Miller or Sam Stein who pointed out something interesting about this dynamic, which is it might not be good for Vance that these cleavages exist if you're thinking ahead, but it is good for each of these individual media properties because they've created a soap opera effect. So it's like, oh, what is Megyn Kelly going to say about Ben Shapiro and all this? And so they've created a universe, I think, is what Sarah Longwell calls it, like
Great
within
point.
the right wing. So I think, I guess another way of saying this is we need to start beefs with different left-wing podcasts. So it's like, I'll come up with a list. I mean, I have legitimate disagreements. I just have a problem with making it personal, like,
Yeah.
but I'll be more upfront, audience, about my beefs, and I'll drop some diss tapes. But we've got one more here. If we're kind of cataloging the different kinds of right-wing people, Dave Smith, I don't think he would call himself right-wing, but he's a big Rogan guy. He's comic Dave Smith, if you remember Dave Smith, who's been on Rogan a ton, largely criticizing Israel. This is what he had to say.
Nothing could vindicate Donald Trump in this. Even if all the files were released and there's no evidence that Donald Trump did anything, did anything with girls or young girls or anything like that, he still tried to cover it all up. So it kind of doesn't matter. He's not vindicated. This is insane.
Trump's problem here is that he created a monster, and that monster is now independent of him and no longer needs him.
Yeah.
MAGA is its own thing now. It's out wandering the world. It's Frankenstein. It's Ultron. It's whatever the name of that thing in iRobot was. And he can't control it anymore.
Yeah, I would say that this is short-term potentially helpful for electoral chances of Democrats, but also long-term really bad for our country, because you'd want to think that this stuff would end with Trump, but in some ways it's gotten, the corners of it are even more extreme and in some ways more durable, because each of these little groups, and I would put Fuentes particularly in this camp, are articulating an even more virulent ideological version of Trump. Now, Trump's own personal flaws are short-term as dangerous as anything that exists on this planet right now, but long-term, if you distill out some of these ideologies that Trump may or may not even believe, but he'll espouse them to the extent they're useful, that's where things get dangerous. And the fact that there are tons of young people who grow up in this country now who listen to Candace Owens. Candace Owens has audiences on the left and the right, Nick Fuentes, that a lot of people are coming up where these are the people they're listening to. And then they've also lived in a world where Trump has been president for a big chunk of their lives. So I think that's dangerous.
We opened the show by saying that we would talk about how to talk about this with your MAGA adjacent or MAGA curious friends. And I'm not talking about engaging MAGA people. I'm talking about the people who are in your life who may have voted Republican, but you feel like they're persuadable. They at least talk about this with you. I would talk about it from this perspective, is to find the things that the folks they're listening to are saying that you can agree with. Send them the clips of Andrew Schultz saying things like this about Trump. Send them the Shaun Ryan clip. Send them that stuff. And then, because if they are your friend or your coworker and are in any sort of relationship with you, whether cordial, required, or social, it is natural for human beings to try to find common ground, because it's easier when you're actually friends and thrown into situations together, and use that as a building block. It doesn't mean you're going to get them to say, "Oh yeah, I'm voting Democratic in the midterms right now," but that's the building blocks. That's the scaffolding, and the that's what you build these relationships on, where you eventually bring them around.
And I said this in the lead up to the last presidential, but sometimes the best thing you can accomplish is getting somebody not to vote. And I think the psychology of that is really complicated. But I would just tell people, it's okay to sit this one out. You don't have to be too gleeful about it, but just be like, if you feel like these people don't represent you, and you feel like you're so far from where the Democrats are, then don't vote Democrat. Just don't vote, or write somebody in.
Yeah, vote libertarian, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about this controversy, newest controversy over at CBS, over Talarico and Colbert. And then we've got some really horrible stuff brewing up on the voting rights side of things, all when we come back.
Look, magnesium is something most of us lack, and if you're taking the drugstore variant, you're still not getting the full picture. And industrial farming, chronic stress, and everyday aging makes it all worse. Almost every supplement uses one form of magnesium, but magnesium comes in many forms, and each form helps your health in a different way. That's exactly why you need to try Qualia Magnesium Plus. Most people know that magnesium is critical for sleep, but some forms help muscle recovery, brain function, heart health, bone health, mood, and over 300 other functions in the body. That's why Qualia Magnesium Plus is the only product to combine 10 bioavailable forms of magnesium with more than 70 trace minerals that help fuel magnesium support. It's full spectrum magnesium to deliver magnesium's full potential. Full body benefits include sleeping deeper, thinking sharper, recovering faster, supporting muscle strength, steadier mood and stress response, and better energy metabolism. And it's not just a sleep supplement, it's a full body magnesium system built for modern living to feel your best every day. And it's time to improve your sleep and enhance your recovery with Qualia Magnesium Plus. Qualia Magnesium Plus has helped me a ton. And I use it, and I've replaced, a sort of plethora of different supplements I was taking with it. And you can experience the most trusted magnesium for purity, potency, and performance. Plus, it's non-GMO, vegan and gluten friendly. If those are your things, making it a choice you can feel good about. So go to qualialife.com/majority for 50% off. And here's a bonus. If you use the code majority for an additional 15% off, you can get an additional 50% off your order. And that's QUALIA life.com/majority and use the code majority. Thanks to Qualia for sponsoring this episode.
ED is more common than you think and simpler to treat than ever. Through HIMS, you can connect online with a licensed provider to access personalized treatment options discreetly and on your own terms. Through HIMS, you can access personalized prescription treatment options for ED if prescribed. HIMS offers access to ED treatment options ranging from personalized products to trusted generics that cost 95% less than brand names if prescribed. You shouldn't have to go out of your way to feel like yourself. HIMS brings expert care straight to you with 100% online access to personalized treatments that put your goals first. This isn't one-size-fits-all care that forgets you in the waiting room. It's your health and goals put first with real medical providers making sure you get what you need to get results. Think of HIMS as your digital front door that gets you back to your old self with simple 100% online access to trusted treatments for ED and more, all in one place. To get simple online access to personalized, affordable care for ED, hair loss, weight loss, and more, visit hims.com/majority. That's hims.com/majority for your free online visit. hims.com/majority. Featured products include compounded drug products, which the FDA does not approve or verify for safety, effectiveness, or quality. Prescription required. See website for details, restrictions, and important safety information. Actual price will depend on product and subscription plan.
All right, more drama at CBS. Colbert went on the air a couple nights ago, said that he couldn't air this interview with Talarico, who's been on this show, who's running for Senate in Texas, and said that the lawyers at CBS instructed him not to because of the equal time rule, which is this rule that says that you have to, if you're going to have one candidate on, you have to give equal time to another. It's complicated because this rule does exist, but it had been...
It's rarely enforced.
A couple decades ago, it's been true for a few decades that they exempted this particular mechanism, which is late night TV interviews, from this kind of balancing. Needless to say, like, I could parse this and give you a technocratic reason why this, like, you could read this either way in terms of the balance. But what is clear is that they're not, the FCC under Carr is not applying this in any neutral manner and trying to be like, let's just go back to the days when we had more balance, right? That's not what they're looking for. They're not looking for balance. But it's weird, Jason, because Colbert gets on, mentions that he was told not to mention the interview. He obviously does mention it. Then they release it on YouTube. And so we all get to see it. CBS came back and claims that they did not force Colbert to pull this. What do you think is the truth here?
I think that this is really, really smart politics by James's campaign, and really smart politics, frankly, by Colbert as well. And I'm not saying like that they work together on it. I think it's more of a, great minds thinking alike. Look, I don't think it's hard to imagine that, we've had him on the show. He was very impressive. I've texted with him a little bit since, and like James a lot. And I think, he and I think get along well because he's experiencing something right now that I've experienced. 10 years ago, I was sort of in a position similar to him, like an emerging person out of a red state that people were looking to, going, oh, he seems to know how to talk to these people, So I know what that's like. And it's interesting to watch somebody else go through it. But anyway, I digress. I don't think it's hard to imagine that Stephen Colbert, who is a progressive and who arrives at his progressive views largely through his faith background, and he talks about that very openly, processes a lot of how he believes the world should be through, his faith. It's not surprising that he is partial to a politician like James Talarico. So I think that a little bit of this is Colbert saying, okay, if I'm not going to have him on, I am going to give him an assist. And then I think great job by James's campaign to say, look, how do we take a candidate who seems to be, your grandma's favorite candidate, in the sense that I mean that in the best way, right? He's a bright young man who's really kind, and frankly, is just polite and has great manners and is smart. How do we make him edgy? And that's what this did. I mean, this said, hey, he's operating at a level where there are powerful people who say they don't want you to hear what he has to say. And that takes your grandma's favorite, nice young man, and turns him into an edgy truth teller who all of a sudden gets his interview taken off the air. And as a result, more people see it, and he raises $2.5 million in 24 hours. And the primary is not that long away in Texas. I think it's a potentially very large moment for that campaign.
Yeah, and I'll just put my cards on the table. I think Texas is a stretch no matter what, but I do think there's a world in which we could win Texas, and this could be a year. But I think he is by far the candidate best positioned to do that. And I think he's, it's going to be an uphill battle for anybody, and the money here is staggering. So this is shaping up already to be the second most expensive Senate primary in record. I think number one was Arizona 2022. With $98.2 million in total ad spending and reservations already. Cornyn with $58.9 million. And Talarico is at 15.3, Jasmine Crockett 2.8. So whoever emerges here on the Democratic side is going to have a significant disadvantage on spending, coupled with the fact that this is Texas, which is always hard for Democrats. But, we looked at that special election. Like, there are some real dynamics at play here that could benefit a candidate like Talarico.
You might not have a significant disadvantage in spending if one of those challengers to Cornyn wins the primary, which I haven't looked at the polls. I don't know how likely that is. But if that happens, then you've got a bit of a perfect storm, because they will have done it with less money and therefore have no money left over. Don't get me wrong. They will quickly raise money from, MAGA folks all over the country. But the other thing that will happen is that whoever comes out of that primary, one, just the intoxicating possibility that you could flip Texas is going to raise lots of money. There's going to be a huge influx of funds for both candidates coming into the general. But if you end up in a position where you come into that and you're running against a far right-wing candidate who upended the incumbent, who people are used to voting for, you A, increase your chances of winning, and B, level out that money playing field right away, and potentially even end up with a money advantage. So that's the perfect storm that could happen. And that is why Talarico is right when he says in that clip on Colbert that the reason that this is happening is because Trump is worried about them flipping Texas, is because if you end up in that perfect storm where you have the far right wing, bombastic, insurgent candidate on the right, well, then definitely, I would imagine your best bet against that is to have the very mild mannered, much more agreeable seeming person coming from the left. And so I think that the MAGA folks are right to be. I think they should be worried about all three of those candidates, but I think they should be worried about a lot of candidates in other states that they may not expect. Right? I mean, there was just an article about Iowa could be a sleeper state. We've had Zach Walz on. There's two candidates in that primary. But I think Zach is a great candidate for the general there and could win that Senate race. So there's a lot of ways to potentially expand the board here.
Well, let's move on to these voting restrictions that are being debated in Congress. Now, I'll defer to you on this, given your role as Secretary of State in Missouri. For new listeners, you were in charge of that state's voting apparatus. They say that none of these have a chance to pass because of the filibuster, so that makes me somewhat reassured. But these are, on the face of them, very scary proposals.
I agree. I think they're very unlikely to pass because of the filibuster, but you do not want to get to the point where we are now, where it's only the filibuster that is keeping something at this level, this sort of voter suppression level, from happening. Because what has saved us from laws like this in the past has been that they have been passed at the state level, and you've had federal courts that have intervened, which in this case, I don't have any confidence that the Supreme Court would stop something like this from going into place. But in many cases, like here in Missouri, it's been state courts interpreting state constitutions that have intervened. And if this passes at the federal level and is ratified by the U.S. Supreme Court, then those state constitutions most likely will not matter and will not stop this from happening. So what is it? It is basically a photo ID, a national photo ID law on steroids, because it dips not just into the ID that you have to present in order to vote. It also goes deeply into what you need in order to register. And it goes into this whole myth that there's all these, people who are not U.S. citizens registering to vote. I could go on a whole thing about how ridiculous of an idea that is. And if people are interested and they want to, send me a comment on social media, I can try and go into why that almost never happens and how unlikely it is to have it happen and how it's just not happened. I could do that, but suffice it to say, I'll just say, you are statistically far more likely as an American to be struck by lightning than you are to commit voter impersonation fraud, which is the only kind of fraud that a photo ID law can claim to prevent. So let's take that as it is. But what they're trying to do is they're trying to say that you have to present something like your passport or a real ID that proves that you are a citizen. But the thing about that is that, actually a real ID, a driver's license, is not proof of citizenship, because there are all sorts of people who are legal residents of the United States, but who are not U.S. citizens who have real IDs. So it doesn't make any sense, except if the purpose of it, which it is to make it harder to vote for people who are less likely to vote Republican. And who are those people? That is people of color, whether they be Black folks, Hispanic folks, young people, students. In a lot of states, photo ID laws, for instance, say that you can present as your ID to register or to vote your concealed carry permit, but you may not present your state university ID, one of which, by the way, has your picture on it, but they don't accept that because that's more likely to come from students who are more likely to be young. I could go through all this, and I've done all these riffs so many times in the past, but I would say here is the biggest. Let me do two things. Let me explain how voter suppression works at a high level. Three things. How voter suppression works at a high level. How you know that this SAVE Act in Congress is only look at my screen doing the bubbles because of my hand gestures.
Where those things come from.
So let me roadmap this. We're going to do let's start with how voter suppression works at a high level. Then we'll go into how you know that the SAVE Act is actually voter suppression. And then finally, let's talk about why they're reviving this kind of stuff, this photo ID stuff. How voter suppression works at a high level. Voter suppression is about creating barriers to voting and then creating barriers to the barriers. So, for instance, a few years ago in Alabama, and I think they also did it in Texas, they passed a law that said you need a state-issued photo ID, like a driver's license or a non-driver's state ID, in order to vote. And then what did they do next, particularly in Alabama? They closed down a bunch of the DMVs where you could get those in the black parts of Alabama. Erect a barrier, create a barrier to voting. Another example would be, hey, we are going to scale back, as the SAVE Act would do. We're going to scale way back on mail-in voting. And then what do? They rely on the states to then consolidate voting places, and they get to choose where, and they will largely consolidate those voting locations in urban areas where the population is more dense and you have to worry more about long lines. So now it's harder and harder to vote. It takes more and more time. You have to take more and more time off work to go vote, and you can't do it before election day. So those are some examples of creating barriers and then creating barriers to the barriers. To me, if you're talking about this with somebody and you're trying to demonstrate evidence that this is not about fraud, that this is actually about trying to keep people from voting who they don't want to have vote, I would point to the fact that this law, like many photo ID laws at the state level have tried to do, requires the form of identification that you show both to register and to vote to be a current valid form. And the reason that's ridiculous is because if you are, say, an older person of color, and you are therefore somebody who, maybe you were born at home, maybe, you grew up in such a way where you're less likely to have all these originating documents, birth certificate, that kind of thing. Or you're frankly just statistically more likely to be in a working class job where it's harder for you to take time off work and go pursue these documents and pay for them and wait in line. Then what they're doing is they're saying, okay, the license that you used to have before you stopped driving, for instance, that's no good. And the reason that makes no sense is because what they're saying is that they want to make sure that people who show up at the polls are the person that they say they are. Well, if your driver's license expired 2 years ago and you didn't get a new one, and you show that to somebody at the polls, that is a picture of you on a state-issued ID that says this is who you are. Did you cease to be that person when your driver's license expired? No, you did not. So it's doing nothing in that case to prevent fraud, but they are insisting on it being a current form of ID. And then finally, the reason that I believe that they are doubling down on this right now, and it's interesting, for the last 2 years, we didn't hear much about photo ID. We were hearing about it nonstop for a long time. And I believe that the reason for that is they saw the polling in 2024 and saw that Black and brown voters and young voters were increasingly starting to move their direction, and they were getting positive trends. And they just took a break, frankly, from trying to suppress those voters, because they began to believe, just as has happened with working class voters that hadn't happened in the past, that they were going to eventually start to have the majority of those voters. And it became no longer in their interest to suppress those voters. And if you look at the trend of polling in the last 6 months, particularly on young voters, there's been a full reversal. People are really just going right back to the way they were. They're very disappointed in Trump. The small gains that they had made with Black voters have pretty much completely gone away. And now Hispanic voters, the numbers with Hispanic voters are beginning to look more and more like their numbers with independent voters, which do not go in their favor. And they're desperate, and they're going right back to their old tricks, and they're trying to claim fraud as an excuse to both ramp up ICE activity, but also, in this case, to suppress and to disenfranchise more of those voters, because they're back to the old playbook, which said, we can't convince those people to vote for us, so we've got to keep those people from voting.
Well, really well said. And one thing to add, based on the New York Times reporting, is like this suppression can happen after the vote now, because of people like Mike Johnson. He, obviously he took so long to seat, I forget the name of the member in Arizona, but he has recently, in the past few days, raised questions about 3 House Republican candidates from California who held leads on election day, but then because of the way they counted votes, lost. He said that they saw their advantages, quote, magically whittled away when more mail-in ballots came. He said, quote, it looks on the face to be fraudulent. He didn't offer any evidence. And even the Republicans who lost that race did not make the argument that those were stolen from them, from what I understand. And of course, Mike Johnson doesn't talk about the cases where this went the other way, where Republicans are leading on election day, or sorry, Democrats are leading on election day and the Republicans win. I do not trust this guy. And I think what we need is a sizable victory. I think if it's a sizable enough victory, and we win enough House seats, it will be untenable for him to block the results. But if it's close, I think we can expect him to refuse to seat members.
So that's the problem with this issue, is that on its face, when you just talk about showing an ID to vote, to people who don't follow this closely, which is frankly most people. When I was elected Secretary of State in 2012, I was dealing with the fact that the majority of Democrats favored a photo ID law. Because on its face, if all you know is the basic wording of it, should you have to show your ID in order to vote? People are like, well, yeah, you should. But you have to make sure you get into the details when you talk to people. You have to say, yes, it's fine. You have to establish who you are in order to vote. I totally agree with that. But then you've got to actually get specific about it. And you've got to use examples. And you have to, I would walk people through like, okay, so what is it you think is happening? You think people are risking a major felony in order to add a single vote. And, you know, you can quote to them the very real statistics that show what I talked about earlier, that, you know, it's a statistically insignificant amount of people who have done this. And in many cases, it's been mistakes. Frankly, in I think the majority of these cases, it's been Republicans, not that that matters. You can do that, but they're not going to go for it. You have to walk them through. Okay, so let me get this straight. I'm going to go to the polls and I'm going to pretend to be Dave Lewis, and I'm going to say, I'm going to Dave Lewis, and you got to let me vote in Dave Lewis's place. And I'm going to go vote my ballot. So I'm betting in doing that Dave Lewis is not going to show up later today and has not already shown up before me. I'm also betting, again, with the balloons on my screen, I don't know. I'm also betting that at the polling place where I vote.
You're celebrating that he didn't show up. It's step one of your plan is
exactly.
clicked into place.
Yes, it's all going to my evil plan. I'm also betting that the person working the polling place is not somebody who will recognize Dave Lewis when he shows up. Because the truth is, for most people in this country, when they go to vote, they see the same election judges over and over again. And those people see you and they get to know who they are. So you're betting that won't happen. And then you're betting that they won't remember what you look like. They won't remember any of those things. And they won't come and find you and send you to prison for many, many years. All so you can get one extra vote. It doesn't make a lot of sense. And it shows you why the statistics bear out that this almost never happens, that you are more likely to be struck by lightning. Now, what I will say personally, and you can, relay this anecdote to people if you like, is that when I was first elected Secretary of State, this was in the early days of them pushing for this sort of voter suppression stuff. And I had this naive, idealistic idea that maybe I would try to go to the Republicans in my state with a compromise that allows them to say to the national Coke run groups, we got your voter ID thing passed, but without doing any real damage to voters. So I said, okay, how about if we require a photo ID, but instead of just a provisional ballot that usually gets thrown out because for a lot of reasons that we don't need to go into, if you don't have a photo ID, you could sign an affidavit. And you would sign the affidavit under penalty of perjury. And furthermore, you would submit a picture and biometrics right there at the polls. So that if it turns out you are lying about being who you say that you are, you will be very easy to find and track down and prosecute. And it was a no-go. They said, nope, it's got to be the version we want. And then behind closed doors, some of the ones who were less enthusiastic about that law and frankly their conscience was bothering them, but they didn't want to stand up at the time, they would say to me, look, behind closed doors, what they talk about is that the purpose of this is to disenfranchise the voters who are not going to vote for them, that they're not really worried about fraud. That's what's actually happening here.
I think what you're going to start to see inevitably is what's happened in redistricting, which is Democrats at a certain point are going to realize, okay, we live in this world now where we've got to play hardball, and you're going to see in rural counties in New York State, for example, shutting down polling places, taking the full extent of the law and showing Republicans what that looks like, because there's as much shenanigans that could happen in Democratic states as in Republican states, but we happen to be the party that believes in expanding access. But at a certain point, you're going to get some ruthless Democrats in power who are just going to be like, you know what? I'm going to create a rule for, for whatever, like the wait time is in Atlanta on election day, last election cycle. We are going to make that the wait time in rural New York State. Like, you're going to have to drive 2 hours to get to the polls. And that's not going to be a great world to live in. But inevitably, Republicans are going to get this. I think this is inevitable. It's probably happening as we speak right now. So Democrats just don't think like this because of what we believe inherently, which is why we always try to pass laws expanding access, even for people who don't vote for us.
I hope that doesn't happen. I think it will be unlikely, mostly because these things are, at the end of the day, there's the funding at the state level, which could cause that. But then at the local level, there's usually an elected official tasked with running the elections, and they're not going to want to look, they're not going to want to look bad and be delivering bad customer service. However, it does, to me, sort of jog my memory about a really effective point that you can make with people to establish credibility on this argument, which is to say, look, this strategy of voter suppression is not something that was invented by Republicans. This has been done for generations by people who are holding on to power and don't want to give power up. In fact, this was originally done by Democratic politicians in the South. That's where Jim Crow laws started, because this was Dixiecrat politicians who didn't want segregation and they didn't want black people in the South to be able to vote. And so they were stepping up, and they were stepping forward with these terrible laws, poll taxes, literacy tests. And so I think that that's a good credibility point to raise with people, is to say, look, Republicans didn't invent this, but Democrats know what it is. And moral, good thinking Democrats turned against this at some point. But so we know what it is because it was Democrats in the South who were doing this originally, and it was wrong then and it's wrong now.
Well, let me go through a couple of AI stories here really quickly. One is that Meta, I think this was from Teddy Schleifer in the New York Times this morning. Meta is spending $65 million minimum in this election cycle, and they're spreading it out, Democrats and Republicans. And if you read the fine print here, there's a lot of state level activity here. And for listeners, I think it's incumbent upon you to really pay attention to where this money goes, because you won't see evidence of it in the ads. So the chances are you're not going to see an ad saying so-and-so opposed the data center, because that data center is unpopular. This is the crypto playbook. They weren't running ads saying, hey, this person, believes in crypto or not. They would find some other liability in the race, spend all their money, even if it has nothing to do with crypto. And the same is true of AI. So these ads are not going to show up on your doorstep explicitly about AI. They're just going to find the candidates they don't like and attack them, find the candidates they do like and support them. So you need to follow this money. You need to pay attention to where this money is going. And you and I have been talking about this for a while. Democrats need to stake out an aggressive position on AI, everything from the regulation of AI to where these data centers are going. And in my opinion, need to be fairly black and white on this issue. Like, you oppose the unrelenting march of this technology. I think we've seen in the past few weeks just how dangerous it could be. There was a great article from Noah Smith about what he worries about as the potential for the creation of biological agents and how quickly we could see superbugs spread. And that could be the greatest risk to humanity. Like, we have absolutely nothing stopping these things right now. And I think Democrats should, both as a matter of morality and politics, be lined up squarely against this stuff.
Totally agree. There is a window right now. There's a jump ball right now as to who is going to pick up the mantle of populism in this country. And right now, Republicans are trying to do it by opposing immigration and saying, we're trying to fight for your jobs and your economic well-being because there are these people who are supposedly coming to take those jobs. But in 2 years' time, people are going to look back and realize that no, the people, quote unquote, who have been coming to take your jobs are actually AI. They're actually robots. And it's going to make immigration look like the tiniest, most trivial issue in the world. and Democrats need to be on record as warning about this so that they're not coming to it lately. The most salient, I think, argument to make about this, other than data centers, and maybe even more than data centers, is that there are states trying to step in front of this train and say, we want to slow this down, we want to regulate it, we want a smart approach to AI. And the federal government, led by Trump, is saying, no, states, you are not allowed to do that. And Democrats should loudly be talking about this right now, because this is the populist, pro-worker, pro-average American policy right now.
Yeah, and this is an underlooked story this week, but the Pentagon is at war with Anthropic, which is probably the most pro-regulation friendly of all these companies. And what we saw is that they're trying to blacklist Anthropic, and the facts here are simple. Like, the Pentagon has essentially said, let us use your models for anything that's technically legal. So weapons development, intelligence collection, battlefield operations, and mass surveillance of American cities. OpenAI said yes. Google said yes. XAI said yes. Anthropic said no. They didn't say no to everything. They said no to two things. They said they didn't want their model used to build fully autonomous weapons that were fired without a human in the loop. And two is they didn't want to use it.
That's pretty reasonable.
No, I agree. And they didn't want to use it for the mass surveillance of American citizens. And now they're viewed as the woke AI company from the Pentagon for this kind of stuff. I think, like, we've been talking about the resist and unsubscribe thing. I think for people, I think a really important statement to make at the moment, now these things could change, these companies could change in many ways. I would cancel your OpenAI. I would cancel your upgraded Google Ultra, and I would move to Anthropic. And it's a better model anyway, so it's a do well by doing good. Like, they've pulled ahead in recent weeks, which we measure these things in weeks now, not years. And so I think you'd get a better product anyway, but it's a company that you could stand behind better. Yeah.
It shouldn't be a difficult thing for Democrats to say on the subject of AI. My view is we should not allow AI to be able to fire weapons without a human making the decision, and we should not allow AI to mass surveil American citizens without a human making the decision. That should be a pretty simple position to take. Now, what is the Trump administration trying to scare everybody about in order to get this unregulated path forward for AI? They're trying to tell everybody China's going to beat us to it. It's the same, argument from the space race, from the arms race. And I'm sorry, if China beats us to having non-human involved weapons technology that can deploy at any time, then we've already lost the plot. And I would rather have technology that can fire against the computer with a human making the decision than a computer deciding when to fire against another computer, because there are no guarantees that our computer will actually consider the lives of human beings more than their computer. I think this is a very simple position.
If you think of the two defining issues of the first 10 years of this century, 9/11 and the Great Recession, right? And they both led to certain kinds of moral panics / populist uprisings. 9/11 should be obvious to everybody. We were scared for a long time, and we did a lot of different things, some good and a lot bad. And then with the Great Recession, we had the bailout, and then we had the rise of the populist politics that probably are still at play today in our politics. I think the combination of existential threat from AI combined with the massive, massive loss of jobs and the concentration of power in the hands of a very few nut jobs is going to be the defining politics, not just of the next 10 years, but the next 100 years. And if you need evidence for just how out of control these people are, here is I think this is the earnings call from Palantir, and this is the CEO of Palantir. Let's go to this clip.
Alex, as always, we have a lot of individual investors on the line. Is there anything you'd like to say before we end the call?
We're doing it. We're doing it. And I'm sure you're enjoying this as much as I am. Let's not talk to analysts about the burden of being right. our burdens of investing in ontology, our burdens of actually looking at the math, the burden of reading what the Rule of 40 is, the burden of being honest about what an enterprise software company is, or the burden of explaining to your friends that you're really happy. Maybe we should just stop talking about it. I'm very happy to have you along for the journey, and you are partners for us. Every Palantirian, we are crushing it. Everyone else who's listening, we are dedicating our company. We have dedicated our company to the service of the West and the United States of America, and we're super proud of the role we play, especially in places we can't talk about. And we love our success in the U.S. and globally. Also, we are doing in the United Kingdom and many other places. Palantir is here to disrupt and make the institutions we partner with the very best in the world, and when it's necessary, to scare enemies and on occasion kill them. And we hope you're in favor of that. We hope you're enjoying being a partner, and we're really happy and very, very focused on what we're doing. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. That concludes Q&A for today's call.
So we're here to scare enemies and on occasion kill them. Now, if you were trying to be the devil's advocate, you'd be like, well, okay, we have defense tech companies all the time. But those companies aren't supposed to be just killing people, right? They're supposed to give technology to the elected leaders and their appointees who make the very difficult decisions about when to take a life. That's not how this guy's talking. And he was even crazier at the Deal Book Summit, where he was, a lot of people thought he was on drugs. And again, I have no idea what he was on, or if this is just how he is. It would actually be in some ways more explainable if drugs were involved. But I think my read is that he's just hyped up on his own power and arrogance.
The way in which the military industrial complex, the actual government work of defending the country, has become fully intertwined with these tech companies is happening at a level that has certainly never happened in American history during peacetime, but has probably also never happened even during wartime. And the clearest example of this is it actually came out a few months ago. There was an article about the fact that tech executives and engineers are being direct commissioned into the United States military at very high officer ranks. So for those who aren't familiar, the direct commissioning program in the military is a program that usually takes folks like doctors or lawyers and says, rather than go through the usual training, you're going to be given a commission as an officer in the military, and you're going to be put in at a higher rank. You're not going to have to start at the bottom, second lieutenant or ensign. You're going to be put in a slightly higher rank. Usually it's first lieutenant, occasionally it's captain, because we need your skills. And, in the Marines and in the Army, those folks, particularly lawyers, for instance, usually have to go through most of the traditional combat training. Doctors, not always. But in all the other branches, they go to what's called knife and fork school, and they go straight in. In wartime, like in World War II, this program sometimes is expanded. So, for instance, if anybody's ever seen the movie Monuments Men, where George Clooney plays a real person who was direct commissioned as a lieutenant without going through much military training at all, but whose very particular mission was to go over and try and save works of art that the Nazis were trying to steal.
Was that movie any good, by the way? I've never seen that movie.
It was okay. I mean, you get to watch Clooney and Goodman and people like that do their thing, and it's fun. But my point is that that's what it does during wartime. What they're doing right now is they're taking executives and high-level engineers from these companies, and they are direct commissioning them into the military at ranks like lieutenant colonel, which, to give you an idea, takes 15 to usually closer to 20 years to reach in the military. They're not sending them to any military training. They're handing them a uniform, teaching them how to salute, and putting them in charge of people who have deployed many times for their country and forcing those people to call them sir. And it looks an awful lot to me like an abuse of power and a corrupt handout to companies like Palantir. And that should worry everybody, because you're taking the humans who are creating the machines that they don't want to have hardly any human oversight over, and putting them as the oversight in the military. That should worry everybody.
And these are also agencies where we've got the inspectors general, we've got
Yes.
All these corrupt lunatics in charge, and they're not. There's no disentangling of the conflicts of interest. Like, how many of these people take foreign investment, are beholden to foreign investors? Have foreign entities, like versions of their companies that are incorporated elsewhere.
And that's why we need to win the midterms, and we need to have the subpoena power to bring these people before Congress and ask them a lot of questions so that they have to at least think twice about speeding up a program like that, because they'll have to answer for it.
Well, let me go through a lightning round. I'm just going to mention a bunch of quick stories, which we would have spent more time on. One is Rubio endorsed Viktor Orban in Hungary. Rubio in 2019 wrote a stinging letter about the backsliding of democracy in Hungary. So just more evidence that he is unrecognizable from the guy we knew just a few years ago. There's speculation, I would say, without much evidence yet, that Alito could be considering retiring. We'll just keep an eye on that. Not much to talk about now. And obviously, if the Democrats took the Senate, there could be a rush to try to get him through. There is precedence. Republicans have gotten their people through in like a month, so they could conceivably do it if they wanted to, but let's worry about that when we have to worry about that. The Trump CFTC moved to stop states from regulating prediction markets. They released a video. I didn't even know they still had, by the way, the CFTC up and running. I thought they gutted it.
Well, they do, for the express purpose of stopping people from regulating things.
Unbelievable. I think this is, again, an issue that Democrats should jump on, is gambling and prediction markets. This is a massive endemic issue for young boys in particular, where they're losing tons of money, getting addicted to these platforms. And honestly, I think if you're in that Holly mold, right, and you're talking about the porn addiction and this and that, and you're doing the Jordan Peterson thing or whatever, there should be something to be said about this stuff. Now, you could be a libertarian and you could be like, I don't want to regulate this at the federal level, but you should have something to say. Like, I think when Democrats, you talk about like, are we able to like have our finger on the pulse of what's actually happening, like today and tomorrow's problems, not yesterday's problems? This seems like a big one. Prediction markets, gambling, young men in particular, hugely problematic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right. Well, real upper of an episode. I mean, I guess what we should end on is simply the fact that while these are the terrible things that are happening, it is increasingly the case that Americans think these things are terrible and want things to change. And we have to continue down that road, because that's going to make a huge difference in November. So we got a little bit of time for one for us. What's going on with you?
I'm wrapping up my time here in New Orleans, and like most people in New Orleans, I spent the weekend building an app on one of these new AI tools instead of going to Mardi Gras stuff. I did go to some of the Mardi Gras stuff. We've had some members of the audience invite me to stuff, and I'm sorry I didn't get to make it to a lot of your parades and parties. But I'll come visit during more normal times, and we'll be able to do that. But I rebuilt the app for Squadra, which I mentioned last week. I was just like, I've been hearing about all these tools now where you can build apps fast. And I was getting specs for the thing I built over the weekend just a year ago for like $100,000 to build this app. And I was able to do it in a couple of days for $26. And I think there's obviously some good from that, but there's also some bad for people who work in software development and all that. But needless to say, for those of you who didn't listen last week, I've been doing this for 8 years, I think now. I've been running a fitness community. It's kind of like a color wars for fitness. It has people from all walks of life, people who've never lifted a weight before, to people like JD Schulten, who are former professional athletes. And I now have it on a 100-point scale where you track certain things like, did you work out a certain amount? Did you lift weights? Did you run? Did you walk? Or tracking your food or whatever. And you get a 100-point score every week, and you compete with your team and you compete as an individual. It's kind of like a color wars. And now I've also created a professional version of it where it's only outputs. And I helped develop it with a bunch of Navy SEALs who came up with all these crazy ways to say, are you elite in fitness or whatever. So you can join. You can go to joinsquadra.com. That's join Squadra, SQUADRA.com. And apply, and we're accepting people on a rolling basis, and we'll be launching the season later in March.
Very cool. My update, I guess personal update, is that I have finally embraced the idea that social media like TikTok and Instagram is something I want to use to speak out.
You've been killing it.
Thank you. I've talked about this a little bit on the show, but not a lot. That in the past, like I totally instinctually understood Twitter and could just do Twitter in my sleep, and it built up a very large following on there. And I just can't use Twitter anymore. It's just too toxic. I really don't really use it at all. I do use Blue Sky, and I have, I don't know, like 160,000 or whatever followers on there, and that's fine. And I do some things on there. But a few weeks ago, I embraced the idea that, you know what, if I want to feel any sense of agency over helping folks, like helping push the narrative in one way or another, or using another platform to do what we do here, which is to help people have a way to talk about these issues or share things with people in their life that may be compelling, or explain things from a different point of view, I've really got to figure out how to use Instagram and TikTok. So I've done that, and I'm actually enjoying it. Every day I do like a minute to minute and a half video where I pick something that's in the news, and I try and explain it, and I break it down in a way nobody else is breaking it down, trying to lean on my experience as a veteran, as somebody who's held office. The last few days I've been talking a lot about voter suppression as a former Secretary of State. And I am finding that people find it valuable, but I'm also finding that it is giving me a greater sense of agency. And instead of waiting until we do the show once a week, I'm actually feeling as though I'm getting some of these thoughts out and into the world, and it's making me feel a little better. So if that's something that interests people, the following on those apps has grown a lot in the last few weeks. So it seems to be valuable to some folks. So at the end of the show, I always say, you can find me at Jason Kander everywhere, but I'm emphasizing at this time that if you want more than just what you hear here once a week, I'm kind of doing it for about 60 seconds every day on Instagram and on TikTok, and that's just at Jason Kander. So, and segueing, you can also find Ravi at Ravi M. Gupta everywhere. Thanks everybody for listening. Thank you to the Midas Mighty. Please leave a 5-star review. Remember, we all have a platform. Make sure to use yours today.